Over the last 5 years, we've helped 10 local selling agents buy their own homes, of which 6 out of those 10 are principals of an agency. Now, the interesting thing there is that we believe, or we feel like that's a privilege to us, and that they trust what we do.
Our motto is buy without regrets, and so
if you can buy a property that will serve you for 10 years as opposed to 3 years, that will serve you well. It's something.
Buying a great property today, that's not just what it's about. It's also getting something that could be ripe for improvement when the time is right for that investor or for the next buyer.
You think about, right, lifestyle, what's important to you? How do you get to work? What do you need for your family? What amenities like parks and shops? Then you look at the budget.
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm a mortgage broker since 2013. And in this podcast, we're going to be interviewing Australia's leading buyers agents, ones with decades of experience, have the local insider knowledge on the street, and can really help you with your buying process, no matter whether you're a first home buyer, upgrader, investor. In this podcast, you'll get access to Australia's leading buyers agents' minds every week on a Thursday. What's the word on the street? Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm in the studio with a long-time friend, someone I've worked with both personally and professionally, Will Hosking, who's from PMC on the Northern Beaches. How you doing, Will?
Chris, thanks for having me on board. Great to be here.
Like I said in the intro, I've known Will for a long time. We've personally live on the beaches. We've bought a few properties that we actually live in on the beaches, and we've worked with the team many times with our clients over the years. And so we know Will really well, but you probably don't potentially. So Will, let's give us a bit of a background on when you became a buyer's agency, a bit more about PMC and where you guys fit in the marketplace, and how's it all going?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, I guess my journey into the buyer's agent world is a bit different. I was fortunate enough my first year out of school to buy a 1-bedroom apartment with my sister up in Milton in Brisbane. And maybe it was a bit of luck involved in that purchase, but the next couple of years we rode a little growth cycle in the Brisbane market. And at that point, I was in my early 20s and I thought, hang on a minute, what's this all about? My sister and I have pulled a little bit of savings together to buy a 1-bedroom apartment, and all of a sudden we're generating some wealth together. I then, I guess, became a bit obsessed with property. I read every book, Michael Yardney, Margaret Lomas, all of the property books that are out at the time, and subscribed to all the magazines. And I remember there was probably a moment where I got home one night and looked at my bedside table and it was just stacked with property books and magazines. And I thought, well, at the time I was working in our family landscaping and construction business. And I thought, hang on a minute, I can see where my passion is at the moment, and let's explore this further. I went to uni, did a Bachelor of Business at UTS, and a mate of mine at uni actually, and this was probably the sliding doors moment for me, he was aware there was a property seminar coming up in Seaforth, and he asked me to go along with him. We went to this property seminar. There was a really nice bloke at the front of the room. There probably was 60 of us in the room, I guess. This gentleman spoke about all the fundamentals of property as an asset class, which I agree with still today, leverage, compound growth, et cetera, et cetera. What was really interesting for me was at the end of that seminar, he asked us all to sign a registration form. And I think probably half the room, maybe 30 out of the 60 signed this registration form, of which one of them was me. That company ended up putting 30 of us into complex in Darwin, offer plan complex in Darwin, and this was in 2007. My sister and I ended up selling that property 7 years later for $7,500 more than what we purchased it for. And it opened my eyes up to how easily the average Australian can, I guess, be led astray or taken advantage of. And I started to question why in my early 20s there weren't more professionals representing buyers on the buy side of a real estate transaction. So that was a bit of a light bulb or sliding doors moment for me in my career. My sister and I actually then, when I was overseas, we interviewed a buyer's agent to buy our third property together. And at the end of that initial meeting, he said to me, "Well, what do you do? And do what you can on a job as a buyer's agent." So I entered the industry in 2010. The opportunity was too good. I took it with both hands. I met my now current business partner, James Fruitigman, at a company we were both working at that point in time. We then, 2 years later, started a buyer's agent division to a national valuation firm. We spent 2 years setting up that division, which was an amazing experience for me to learn the fundamentals of property and valuations. And it was like a degree on the run for me. And then in 2014, we bounced out and started PMC, and here we are today.
Look, we've known each other a long time. I didn't actually know those stories around the sort of the off the plan days, just your personal experience there. And I do think, once you've seen been burnt yourself, or you've seen clients being burnt with really poor property advice, I guess you really get a passion to do the opposite, right? And I think I saw that in the financial advice world. I saw it very early days when I explored the property world and looked at what clients were doing and where it worked and what didn't work. I mean, PMC is a decent firm though now. I mean, you're talking, been in the buyers agency world for 15 years. You've obviously got a Brisbane office, which we're not going to talk about too much today. I'll probably get James on to talk about that. But the Northern Beaches part of Sydney is where you focus on today. Why do you really try to own that patch, and tell us a bit more about your team?
So the team, yeah, that's right, Chris. We do have a team up and down the East Coast now, but I'm based in our Manly office, and we definitely, out of our Sydney team, specialise on the Northern Beaches. We also do a bit on the Lower North Shore, but probably the vast majority of our purchases are the Northern Beaches. Maybe taking a step back, when in my early days entering the buyer's agent world, I was probably guilty as well of trying to cover too broad an area for clients. And I think what happens then is if you don't have an intimate knowledge of your local marketplace, you end up being more like a facilitator of a transaction, or what we sometimes call a hand-holding buyer's agent. There was probably a bit of a pivotal moment in our business when one of my colleagues, Matt Cleland, joined and wanted to sort of take a real lead on the home buying stuff here locally on the Northern Beaches. And Matt was really big on us driving that area of specialisation and knowing our market absolutely intimately, knowing every transaction, every street, every agent, the good and the bad sides of the street, et cetera, et cetera. So the way we've set up our Northern Beaches team is, whilst we do specialise on the Northern Beaches, we actually have a view that the beaches is even a too big a market for one or two people to try and cover. The Northern Beaches, we as a team break down in 4 different sections. So we've got the southern end of the beaches, closer to, let's call it from Manly through to Curl, North Curl. We've got the mid beaches, which is DY through to, let's call it Mona Vale. We've got the upper beaches, which is Mona Vale to Palm Beach in your neck of the woods, Chris. And then we've got the area that we call the forest. So French's Forest, Belrose, Davidson, and even pushing out to Terry Hills. So to expect one buyer's agent to even know the Northern Beaches and have an intimate market knowledge is, I think, too big a ask. So each of our team within our business actually specialise in one section of those Northern Beaches. The intent behind that is for us to bring maximum value to the table for our clients. That then has a flow-on effect, obviously, with accessing off-market, pre-market opportunities, understanding values really well, having strong relationships with the agents in the area. So, yeah, that's our setup here locally on the beaches.
Yeah, it's interesting you reflect on that story with Matt. I think it is the journey that most people in business go through. I mean, they start out and they try to learn it, and they help clients of all different sort of demographics and walk of lives and of stages of life, whether you're an advisor or a broker or an accountant, etc. And I think when you start getting really good at your craft is when you start to really hone in on a certain segment, whether you're an advisor or a buyer's agent. And I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you've honed in on the beaches, which I think the best buyer's agents do. They pick their patch and then they start to really understand what really makes that market tick and what holds. And also, years teach you that, right? I mean, you're talking, 10, 15 years of buyer's agent, whatever it is in the beaches market. You've seen it through different cycles. You haven't just saw it through the pre-COVID, the COVID, the post-COVID, and even the booms of the 2015s. I mean, you talk about the beaches in 4 different patches there as well. I mean, because it is quite a decent area, when you go from Manly up to Palm Beach. I mean, what are some of the things that when, a lot of new buyers in the beaches as well, maybe they've, living the eastern suburbs life, or maybe they've moved here back from overseas. A lot of new people who haven't grown up on the beaches. What are some of the things where they sort of just don't understand what the locals want when they first enter the beaches market?
Yeah, it's really interesting. We see a lot of that too, Chris, particularly since COVID. We've seen a really strong migration of people, particularly, I think, youngish families from the eastern suburbs, but also, even downsizers from the upper North Shore, lower North Shore that are selling their big family homes. The kids have left home. They've got the appeal of moving to the beaches and having all the amazing lifestyle that the beaches presents. So we do get a lot of people, funnily enough, coming out of area, like still maybe Sydney, but coming out of the beaches. I think the beaches has gone through a really interesting transformation. I actually was born on the beaches. I think you could generalise and say it was a bit more of a blue collar, working class area of Sydney. And we still maintain a core group from that sort of sector or demographic, which is so important. It's part of the fabric of the Northern Beaches. I hope that never changes. But there's definitely been an influx of more white collar that are working in the CBD or particularly the CBD or other hubs like North Sydney, Macquarie Park, etc. What's challenging, I think transport's pretty tricky here on the beaches. We've only got, really one node of transport, and that's the Beeline buses or buses. We don't have any trains, or obviously we've got the ferry that runs from Manly, but if you're not close to Manly, that becomes a bit prohibitive to get into Manly and then jump on the ferry. People that don't know the beaches don't understand that and the challenges. So what we try and do is really understand when we're meeting a buyer what their primary drivers are around their purchase. So we can then guide them around the best parts of the beaches that we think are suitable for them. And an example of that would be, and I think you can relate to this, that like the upper beaches is just beautiful in terms of the lifestyle and what it has to offer with the beaches up there, Pittwater on the western side. It's a magic place to live, but it doesn't suit everyone if they've got to be in the city, let's say 5 days a week working. So it's trying to get people to understand the different challenges of commute times, limited transport, what are their primary drivers, and make sure they land on a location and a property type that really meets their needs.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like the beaches is just so varied. I mean, I know it intrinsically because I lived here, right? But, every little village, I guess, along the beaches have their own sort of pros and cons. And I think you've absolutely hit on a really good point. I mean, yes, it's driven by a lot of couples and families that are getting forced out of, say, the eastern suburbs or even the inner west or lower North Shore and are looking for an alternative, for a forever home. But the beaches has a really strong demand for people downsizing or, as the kids have finished the high school on the North Shore or the eastern suburbs, they don't need to get to the city as much. Maybe they're getting very late in their careers or maybe they've retired and they can sort of move a bit further away. They don't want to go too far, right? Because the kids are maybe going to uni or they're living around the city. So they don't want to move 2-3 hours away, and it sort of gives them that nice mix in the middle. Do you think that's one of the things that is really, good that's going to drive the beaches growth long term is not just the family demand, but the downsizers sort of demand competing on sort of a few small pockets along the beaches?
Yeah, definitely. Without a doubt, Chris. And, I think it's a good and a bad thing. I think from a performance perspective, sure, like if you're wanting to see the upside in growth in either your own home or if you own an investment property on the Northern Beaches, and I don't think I'm trying to put my personal bias aside being a local on the Northern Beaches and understanding all the beautiful aspects or the amazing parts about the beaches, trying to put that aside, I actually think the beaches could continue to outperform the broader Sydney market. It was really appealing, let's say, back around that sort of COVID period from an affordability perspective. I think we've seen quite strong growth in certain sectors of the beaches where maybe it isn't today as affordable as it once was. But because of the lifestyle drivers, the downsizers come into the area, I think a lot of young families coming from the east, inner west, North Shore, seeing the appeal of the Northern Beaches lifestyle, it is going to have a continued impact on prices. The double-edged sword is that I think, unfortunately, sadly, it's going to drive a lot of people out of the beaches because it's going to become more and more unaffordable. I think about Manly, where our office is based, and the appeal for downsizers to have arguably one of the nicest beaches in Australia where you're only a 20-minute ferry ride back into the CBD. Now, for downsizers, that's not necessarily for employment. That might be to head into the Opera House to watch a show or meet friends from other sections of Sydney, to go to restaurants. It's just such an appealing place for downsizers to live. So, we're seeing some new apartment buildings or complexes being built around Manly, and it feels like every time a new complex is built, we're seeing square metre rate records broken for particularly beachfront apartments because of that strong appeal to downsizers and the downsizer demand.
And I've sort of personally gone through this journey as well. I guess people come from different parts of the city and they sort of don't really understand some of the challenges the beaches have. I mean, some of the things that are good for, say, price growth are also challenges for certain properties. You've got lots of waterways, you've got lots of escarpments, you've got black holes. It's hard to get in and out of suburbs. And what are some of the other things that, people sort of maybe misunderstand that holds back their growth of the property or doesn't make the property that nice to live in? that they haven't factored into their decision until after they're purchased?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think we're pretty lucky, and this isn't to give too much of a generalised comment, but I think we're pretty lucky that there's not really many pockets that I'd deem on the beaches areas that you've got to avoid. Probably my opinion would be it comes more down to the property level, like more granular than that. Just the typical things that we try and educate clients around, whether they're investors and or home buyers, avoiding simple things like main roads, subarterial roads, low-lying areas, potentially properties that have got aspects that aren't favourable to natural light. So, there's beautiful or amazing suburbs on the beaches that still have properties that have those attributes that we've got to ensure clients try and avoid. The transaction costs associated with residential property are so high that making the wrong mistake can be really costly. So making sure our clients are really informed on the beaches, making sure they're buying what we deem to be the best possible property that they can afford within their budget is really important. I guess there's certain pockets that come to mind, like the Manly Creek, which is a little section of North Manly as you're driving out on Pittwater Road. To the left of Pittwater Road, as you go over the bridge of Manly Creek, there's a little low-lying area in there called the Manly Flats. Now, that has flooded. It does have a high flood risk. The interesting thing is you can educate clients around that. And I think the most important thing is that they're aware of it or they're informed. Every client has a different risk profile. And some people see the appeal of being so close to Manly, you can walk or cycle back into Manly. It's a flat little area where it's really intimate for the locals that live in that area. There's street parties, there's kids on skateboards, etc. Some people are willing to wear the risk that, yes, maybe it has a flood risk, but we want to be close to Manly, we're willing to wear it. But as long as they're informed. Another section would be that really well, Narrabeen Lakes. Such a beautiful pocket of the beaches, huge lifestyle benefits. There's certain low-lying sections around Narrabeen Lakes where buyers need to be aware of the flood risks. Or if we jump further up the beaches, again, a bit more your neck of the woods, Chris, is the topography of the beaches can be really challenging, like quite steep sections of the beaches, which comes with its own risk around bush, particularly an area with high density of bush. We've got bushfire risk, we've got landslip risks. Again, every buyer has a different risk tolerance, or every buyer has a different desire of what they want to live in. Our job is to make sure they're informed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all the different parts of the beaches have different sort of parts that people really want to be, and then maybe people are a little bit hesitant, whether it's the flood risk or the aspect or, I guess it's noise in certain parts. I mean, there's parts of the beaches that are going to get developed, obviously around sort of Brookvale, you say Manly's going through a bit of a, increasing heights around the beaches, etc. But the beaches just generally, though, have sort of avoided a lot of the changes that sort of Chris Minns is sort of implementing. A lot more happening in the east, the sort of the lower North Shore and upper North Shore and the west, inner west, etc. So how do you think that that's going to sort of change the beaches, because, I guess a lot of parts of Sydney are going to get densified, but the beaches is sort of just due to nature and due to that lack of transport, hasn't really got that. Do you think it's going to make it more desirable, or how do you think it's going to change?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think, again, if you ask the locals, that'd be discouraging a lot of that development, obviously, and that's a pretty natural defensive reaction, I guess, resistance to change. But then on the flip side, a lot of us talk about, wanting our kids to be able to afford to live on the beaches and live near us. So it's a part of progress. You're spot on. I think the biggest challenge to increasing density or population on northern beaches is the transport options. At the moment, you've got 3 arterial roads. So you've got the Spit Bridge or Military Road, which typically people will commute via the Spit Bridge Military Road to North Sydney or the city. You've got Warringah Road, which heads more to like Chatswood and the CBDs of Chatswood or out to Macquarie Park. And then you've got Mona Vale Road, which people might go Mona Vale Road to get to, again, Macquarie Park or other economic hubs or employment hubs in Sydney. But from a transport perspective, it'll be really hard for the state government to justify increasing density too much, because we've got most of those 3 arterial roads experience significant congestion during peak hour. And the Spit Bridge is a famous one. Most people are aware of it in Sydney. The interesting thing is, and a lot of people might or might not be aware of it, but there's a state significant DA application or project that's been put forward by the owners of Warringah Mall. They're proposing, I think it's 8 mixed-use towers along Pittwater Road and Old Pittwater Road of a combination of somewhere between 12 and 39 stories high. Now, that's huge. And to put that into context, the highest building on the northern beaches at the moment, so the highest unit complex on the northern beaches at the moment is the Meriton building in DY. which I believe 17 stories high. So the current DA proposal that's in from the owners of Warringah Mall, if it gets through, will double that height. And I think the plan is to bring an extra 1,500 apartments to that Brookvale precinct or the Warringah Mall precinct. Now, the interesting thing is talking about Chris Minns is because it's considered a state significant project, it actually bypasses the local council approval process. Now, we're all fascinated to see how that unfolds because, I live in Freshwater, which is more or less a neighbouring property to Brookvale. And I think about what's the impact that's going to have on the roads, congestion, beaches on the weekend, etc. So, look, I don't think we have been definitely to a degree, I think, sheltered from increasing in population and density, but we're not completely immune to it. And let's see what happens with this significant project that's been put forward.
Yeah, I do think it's one of the things, particularly in the Sydney market, that people have got to be very aware of, because I think there's been a bit of a change of guard and obviously things are changing. And you're right, typically in the beaches, there was a bit of development happening around DY, on Pittwater Road there. And, and it was sort of all lumped together. But, there is some major developments happening in Narrabeen, in Brookvale, obviously down in the foreshore in Manly, etc. And you just got to be really aware of this. And obviously you're really across it. And I think that's what great buyers agents are doing, right? They're looking at everything that's sort of changing within their patch to go, oh, that's something that's new information. We need to protect our clients from, how that could affect things. I mean, obviously the agents on the beaches, the relationships with them take time. I mean, how do you, does that really help you, as you've been a buyer's agent for so long, and how do you sort of, maintain those relationships and actually get advantages for your clients?
Yeah. Agent relationships are critical in our game, absolutely critical. Obviously, the obvious point is providing or giving us access to more opportunity than what would otherwise see on realestate.com or Domain. How do we forge relationships? I think it's always doing what you say you're going to do, being consistently active in the marketplace. We've got a really interesting, dynamic or relationship with the agents on the Northern Beaches. Obviously, coming back to our patch model, each of the senior buyers agents that own a patch know every one of their agents intimately. I guess a really fascinating statistic for us as a team is that over the last 5 years, we actually just spoke about this the other day, over the last 5 years, we've helped 10 local selling agents buy their own homes, of which 6 out of those 10 are principals of an agency. Now, the interesting thing there is that we believe or we feel like that's a privilege to us, and that they trust what we do, they trust our expertise, they trust our local market knowledge. For someone who operates on the beaches, and you'd expect to know their market intimately as well, to appoint us as their buyer's agents, it's a nice privilege that we've had. It's interesting with buyer's agents, we've always said as a team, we want to be known as the buyer's agent that fights hard for our clients. Like, we're willing to pay fair market value for a property, but we don't want to be that buyer's agent that agents call just to get a deal done. We've actually had some criticism from a couple of agents in the past around us being too hard on our numbers. Now, we're okay with that criticism. We always say, again, internally within our team meetings, we want to be the buyer's agent that agents call when their mother, brother, sister, friend wants to buy. So we don't want them to be the one that they're calling us because they're, just trying to get a deal done. So yeah, we've got really great agent relationships, I believe. How do we maintain those? Frequent activity in the marketplace, doing what you say you're going to do. We go through a really extensive discovery meeting with all of our clients, understanding what their drivers are, and then that leads into helping them get a lot of clarity around what their brief looks like, making sure it's realistic and achievable. And then when we roll into their ready to buy meeting after they engage, part of that process is diving deep around their finances, conveyancer we're going to be working with, making sure they understand the process and journey we're about to go on. So what that does is we're building the foundations or the building blocks that when we actually identify a property we like, that we're going to move on, we can move with some speed, certainty and confidence. And on the flip side of that is the agents really like that. They know when they're working with one of the buyer's agents from PMC, they've got a qualified buyer, pre-approved, they've been set up really nicely. They're going to do what they say they're going to do. They mightn't pay the price the agent wants necessarily. They'll negotiate fair but hard. And I think that helps us maintain really strong agent relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I do sort of can see that as someone who's worked with you, but also referred to you for many years. You've got a very methodical, well thought out and followed process. And I don't think that's every buyer's agent's got that. I do think that's one of your strong suits. But also I think that the beaches was probably a pretty good patch to pick, it wasn't really a buyer's agent market, I would say. I mean, you might say the opposite, but, a lot of buyer's agents in the east, inner west, lower, north shore, there's not that many choices, right? There has been in more recent years, there's been a few more pop up, but a lot of people didn't, a lot of buyer's agents didn't sort of pick that patch. I mean, you picked it a long time ago, and then you've invested heavily in your team and broken it up in suburbs. And, and I think that just longevity would build a lot of trust within the beaches market, because agents don't turn over that fast, right? They finally get to the top of the tree and then they stay there as long as they can. And doing what you say you're going to do, I think that's what the agents really want to know, is when you do go through a property and, you're going to go through the process. They're not just going to, basically chase the wrong rabbit and miss out on other buyers because they've invested in you being the buyer. Obviously, the beaches does have a lot of challenges. What are some of the big mistakes, though, when you're looking at clients and their briefs, that potentially they could sort of, make a mistake on the beaches in terms of the type of asset they buy?
Yeah, it's interesting. This one's an interesting one, Chris. So again, as opposed to sort of trying to identify or pick an asset or an area they can typically make a mistake, again, I think it comes back to the buyer. And what we typically see, a lot of people come to a buyer's agent looking for the key things that most good buyer's agents should provide anyway, like save time, save money, remove a lot of the stress out of the process, bring you local market knowledge, bring you off market. So they're the things that you should do as a good buyer's agent. We feel our role's so much more than that, and it's helping clients get clarity around their brief. And that's often trying to get alignment around husbands and wives or partners that come to us where there's often misalignment. We feel like, coming back to the mistake side of things, typically where you see most buyers make mistakes is where they don't have clarity around their brief. It causes confusion, analysis paralysis. It might prolong their search journey where they then get burnout as a buyer and end up just jumping on the next opportunity which they either overpay for or it's the wrong property. So I think the mistakes that we see is people not being clear on what their brief is. And I mentioned this before, the flow-on effect from that is, once you help a client get clarity, is making sure that brief's realistic and achievable. Because again, if they're working in a marketplace or a suburb where their budget's not aligned, even if they've got clarity around brief, it's just going to prolong the journey. So we're really big on that. And then that flows into, obviously, again, making sure that once we hone in on a market, that the senior buyer's agent that's going to lead them in that patch of the northern beaches is, of course, we're going to make them aware of the areas that are low-lying, that maybe have a rat run in the morning during peak hour, that could have pockets of public housing if that's a concern to them. And then maybe more granular at the asset level is once we start inspecting property, depending on what their requirements are. And maybe I'm sort of rabbiting on a little bit here, but I've got a really interesting perspective on where buyers are at in their journey in life. I feel like, and let's talk about families, young families, often when you're going through the process of a buyer with young families, I think everything between the age of maybe newborns to early teens should be about convenience and ease and making life easier. So things like, we're adamant around having off-street parking and ideally covered parking. So if they've got the young kids in the car with a car full of shopping and it's raining, you've got cover. It makes life easier, it removes stress. Flow from living to yard, nice level yard, so it's easy to have the kids running back and forth onto the yard. Visuals from the kitchen out to the yard. Things that we look at for a younger family to make their life easier. Then as the kids get older and they might actually want some separation from the parents, and the parents might be in a different stage in life financially, we can jump into some elevation, where the blocks might be steeper, but as a result of that, you're getting some amazing views or outlooks. And so level blocks not as important at that point in their life. It's trying to find out what their drivers are, make sure we get clarity around their brief, and then we'll try and help them avoid making a mistake at the buy side.
I love how you reframe that, Will, because, one of the questions I love to ask is sort of those intangibles. And I think what you've just sort of highlighted is how important it is to do the work up front and to really get key understanding of where they're at in their life. And I think you're right. I think a lot of families, myself included, you just don't know what it's like when you're pre-kids, what it's like to have a kid or have two kids, have two toddlers, or and what you're going to value completely shifts. And I think having someone who's gone through that journey, you've got 3 kids yourself as well, is to actually understand, this is what's going to, you kind of sort of foresee some of the challenges. If they go down this property and it hasn't got that on-street parking, they're really going to struggle with that. And that's going to be basically put a sour taste in their mouth. Yeah, they're going to have this property, but it's just going to be a continued frustration. And I think having just those difficult potential conversations and going, look, I know you like that property. It's got the view, or it's, in a nice pocket, but this is quite a big negative you need to think through, and challenging on them is a real value add, and potentially stopping them by the wrong property. It might still be a good asset. Absolutely. It might still perform well, but it doesn't match, their life, I guess. Beaches, I also think have got, poor assets within it, absolutely, whether it's aspect or, certain apartment buildings or parts of suburbs that are black holes that, people don't want to be in, and busier roads, etc. It's not really filled with a lot of poorer apartment stock as, say, other parts of the city. And so it's less of a concern, I guess. And there's not really any black holes or areas that you really want to avoid, which you sort of mentioned before. I mean, some of the other intangibles, if you think about it at the end, and then you've sort of really highlighted this as a business value, I would say, for a long time, is just giving a really good, amazing customer service. And then clients will talk about it and refer to us over the years. What are some of the intangible things you get on those reviews? Like, what are the things that, I wasn't expecting that when I worked with, Will and Matt and Mikey and the team. They sort of write on their reviews, and they weren't expecting from the buyer's agent experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that probably comes back to our ethos as a business from a marketing perspective, is that we haven't ever really done much around marketing or advertising. Most of the business is based on word of mouth and referral. And what we say, we kind of remind each other all the time, is the best dollar of spend or the best leverage from a marketing perspective is the client we're working with today. Like, if we give them an amazing experience, and this isn't overplaying it, like, I genuinely think it's such a large, obviously financial decision, but such a large decision in someone's life that you can have a genuine impact on their life. So we often, when we get Google reviews or client reviews, as a team, we circulate each review. And I personally get super proud when you read some of the reviews that they're life-changing. It's not like, you saved me some time or a bit of stress, or they'll go into really quite deep reviews around the impact that it's had on their life. And one thing we often talk about with clients is helping people move forward in life. When you get stuck, everyone's got a driver, everyone wants to go somewhere. And when you help someone move forward in life with clarity, you see the knock-on effect, and it's really cool. It's super powerful. So yeah, I think they're the ones we love, is when you get the feedback from clients where they go deeper than just the surface level stuff around an off market or saving time or stress and those things. It's more around maybe even so those that were a bit skeptical around a buyer's agent initially, and then how they say, I'll never buy a property without one again. Yeah, they're the really cool ones, the life-changing journeys that you can, or not journeys, the impacts you can have on a client's life.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. A lot of people do get stuck, whether it's, should I sell that investment property? Should I upgrade? Should I stretch? Should I buy a renovation? And it's really stressful. They get burnt out, and and it becomes a stress in the relationship, and, because there's no decision, and it just sits there, and then there's an opportunity cost and then that's painful to deal with. And so, yeah, actually sort of making a decision and getting clarity and taking action. I think that is one of the best buyer's agents are able to do. They're able to build confidence and help them make that decision. And then not only, make a decision, actually make it happen. It's quite hard in markets to sort of just have the patience and persistence to just keep out there, and in particularly re-energize yourself after you miss out on a few, which might have been the right properties to miss out on, or if you lost that property that was the one that got away. And so I think that's one of the values of great buyer's agents, is they increase the chance of making that happen, but also potentially reduce the opportunity cost of missing out for years on end. Been awesome chat, Will. Obviously, we've worked with you, and any client working with you on the beach is in safe hands. We will get James and the Brisbane team on in time, and thanks so much for the chat today.
Yeah, cheers, Chris. Thanks for having us. Great to chat, and we'll speak soon.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you got lots of value out of it. If you'd like to speak to our guest today, there's links in the show notes on how you can get in contact. And if you're buying your first home, upgrading, renovating, or need any finance-related queries, obviously we'd love to help. There's links in the show notes to us as a mortgage broker, and we look forward to next week's episode.